Okay, today I'm going to take you through how to go about installing the open source release of the Acme Air exemplar on Docker Local powered by the IBM Cloud Services Fabric and NetflixOSS. So to start out, we're going to run this on VirtualBox. So you can see here I've got an Ubuntu that has been installed, Ubuntu 14.04, that's been installed off a CD. I've given it 3 gigs of memory, and for disk, I've given it a persistent disk of 80 gigabytes, and you can see you only use about 8 of that. I also have configured the networking just to make it a little easier. I have NAT-based networking to get out, and I've created a host-only adapter mapped to the VBox Net 0 adapter. And if you see in the settings for that network, that's the 172.16 subnet. To address that network, what I do is I will add a route to the 16 network on my guest of VirtualBox, and I'm going to route all traffic that's going to go to and from the host that we're eventually going to set up on Docker, the 172.17 network, to that interface that I'm going to define for the VM. You can follow some of the instructions of how to do this. If you go to my blog, I've got a entry which I'll put a link to about accessing the Docker container private network easily from your boot to Docker, or in this case, VirtualBox Docker host. Okay, let me go ahead and start this Ubuntu host. And let's SSH into it. I've already got a key installed to make it easy to get into. So you can see that I've added the interface for 172.16.0.254 into my configuration for this Docker host. One of the first things that you're going to need to do is go out to our GitHub page. You're going to find a project called Acme Air NetflixOSS Docker Local. And if you scroll down, you're going to find the very first thing that we do. So this is going to change how the Docker daemon listens. By default, it's just going to be listening on a local socket, which is the most secure option. What we're going to change it to here is to listen on all addresses of this Docker host. Now, there's security implications of doing that, but you can do this more carefully if you'd like. This just makes it a lot easier to get access to the Docker daemon by all the various parts of the infrastructure. So to change that, I'm going to edit etc default Docker. And I'm going to add those Docker options in there. And I'm going to stop the Docker daemon. And I'm going to stop the Docker daemon for real this time. And I'm going to start it back up. And now if I do a netstat grep listen, you'll see it's listening on all interfaces. Now if I do a Docker images, you're going to see so far I only have Ubuntu installed in my images and none of the Acme Air Netflix Docker Local example. So coming back to the project on GitHub, if I come here and copy the Git URL for the project, I'm going to do a Git Clone. And once that is cloned, you'll see a bunch of projects that are the various containers that get built to run this sample. Go into the bin directory and you'll see a accept licenses command. So in this command, it's going to send you to a URL where you can go look at all the licenses of the software that's going to be assembled as part of doing the Docker build, which is this page right here. So you can see that there are going to be a few containers that are built by running this, and for each one of the containers you'll see what software is going to be installed, and you'll see a pointer to the licensing information, be it open source, be it IBM technology or other. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you've read through that and you agree to it before you do any of the building of the images or using of the images. So once you've read through those, go ahead and accept the licenses. And once you've accepted licenses, you can go ahead and build the images. So what this is going to do is it's going to pull down a few different images that are in the public registry, the index for Docker. It's going to build a few, and it's going to download from various sources as it's building those from various websites and file servers and continuous integration servers that exist out there. But everything it's going to pull is publicly accessible, so anyone can do this based on that single Git Clone command and this build images command. And right there, what it did was it generated an SSH key that it's going to use for all the containers, so you can SSH into them. And that's going to be a random key, so it's going to be different for everyone's installation, but it'll be written into the bin directory and you can use that later. And while this is building, you can see the images to see what kind of progress it's making. So if you do Docker images, you'll see all the Acme Air images that, if I look at the script I'm running, you can see what order it builds them in, so you can kind of get an idea of how much further you have to go. Okay, so after about 30 minutes, a little less, and that was mostly download time, and this was my home cable internet connection, we have all the containers built. So now if I do Docker images for Acme Air, you should have 16 images built. So now let's go ahead and get the images running. So this is what the Docker local setup is going to look like. We're going to start up some Docker level service discovery agents. We're going to start up an autoscaler. We're going to start up one instance of the Acme Air web app and one instance of the Acme Air auth service microservice. We're going to stand up a Cassandra node for both of them to talk to. We're going to stand up the Netflix Eureka application aware service registry. We're going to set up a Zuul load balancer in front of the web apps, and we're going to set up an Asgard console to manage the environment. So once those images are built, let's go ahead and start up that environment. So we do that by just running the start minimum.sh script. You can see that it starts up the sky.skydns, starts up Cassandra. It's going to wait for Cassandra to get started, and then it's going to run the data loader to load up Cassandra with a couple flights and user data, so you have some data to work with. You may see that timeout happen, but it'll retry. Okay, now it's started up the other parts of the cluster. It's starting up the autoscaler, which we call the Microscaler. Once it's up, it's going to SSH into the Microscaler and use the command line interface to define an autoscaling group for the web application part of Acme Air, and a different auto-scaling group for the authentication service of Acme Air. Given it's the first time it's SSH'd in, you're going to have to answer yes there to let it SSH in. And there you go. So if you run docker ps-a now, what you're going to see is you're going to see the various parts of the infrastructure, and you're also going to see a web app and auth service auto-scaled instance that the autoscaler has started. Now, if you want to connect to the environment, there's a command called show IP addresses. Let me show you how you can use those IP addresses. So if you remember, I said it would write out a SSH key. So I can SSH into any one of these instances. Let's just take Asgard for an example. And I can do standard administration of these instances. So you can see that right now Asgard is finishing loading itself. So let's go ahead and connect to Asgard. And there you have it. So I also can go into the Eureka server and see what instances are up, or I can navigate around the IaaS environment. You can see that my different auto-scaled services as well as Zuul are sitting there running. You can see the clusters. And then anytime you want to restart the environment, you just start minimum, and that takes about a minute, and you can run this entire sample environment. Thanks. Bye.